Hi everybody. I take this moment to thank the members of this team for providing me the platform today to present to you Introduction to Neuroanatomy. While I was in first MBBS, as I flipped through the pages of third volume of DDC, Neuroanatomy to me appeared as Greek and Latin. But once I finished my post-graduation in anatomy, I realized that neuroanatomy is the most interesting part of anatomy to learn. Once you get to understand the basic concepts of neuroanatomy, trust me, you will start falling in love with anatomy. At the end of this presentation, I will give you two important tips to master anatomy. Why do you think it's important to pay attention to this lecture? Now you're in first MBBS. Definitely you'd have come across scenarios where members of your family or your non-medical friends would have come to you with an X-ray asking you to diagnose and sometimes treat. Very soon they might come with some CT and MRI. In this slide, of the two images given, which do you think is a CT? Which one could be an MRI? What are the parts of the brain that you see here? And do you think it's a normal or abnormal picture? Can you answer my questions? Of course, these images are normal. The one that you see here, both these are abnormal. So, if you make up your mind to pay attention to this presentation, at the end of it, you yourself will be able to differentiate the CT from an MRI, identify the parts of the brain seen there, and of course, differentiate the normal from abnormal. Whenever you have a sound anatomical knowledge, your level of confidence increases when you handle a clinical scenario. In general anatomy, you'd have learned that the nervous system is broadly classified into central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system includes the brain and spinal cord. The brain that you see here is located and well protected within the cranial cavity. The spinal cord is located within the vertebral canal. So in school, you would have studied that the nervous system is made up of two types of cells, neurons and neuroglial cells. Neurons are the structural and functional unit of the nervous system. They consist of the cell body, the axon, the dendrites arising from the cell body. The neuroglial cells are more numerous compared to the neurons. They structurally and functionally support the neurons in the nervous system. There are mainly four types of neuroglial cells that you would have learned in physiology, isn't it? The ependymal cells, they are seen to line the ventricles of the brain. You know the ventricles are filled with cerebrospinal fluid. The specialized ependymal cells, they secrete CSF. The astrocytes are the largest neuroglial cells. They are of two types, protoplasmic and fibrous astrocyte. You can see here the foot process of the astrocyte. They are in contact with the wall of the blood vessel. These astrocytes, they contribute to the blood-brain barrier formation. The microglia are the smallest of the neuroglial cells. They are phagocytic in function. The oligodendrocytes are smaller than the astrocytes and they are involved in myelination of the axons of central nervous system. Of the four neuroglial cells, microglia alone is derived from mesoderm, whereas The ependymal cells, astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, they are derived from neural crest. This is an important MCQ. Now, how do the neurons and the neuroglial cells differ? Mainly in their function. Okay. So the neuroglial cells are non-excitable. They are mainly supportive in function. This you should be thorough with. This also you might have learned in your neurophysiology. The important terminologies that you come across in CNS. So you know that the neuron consists of the cell body and the axon. What do you mean by gray matter and white matter? Gray matter in the central nervous system is made up of the cell bodies of these neurons. The white matter is made up of the axon of these neurons. The other name for axon is nerve fiber. Bundle of nerve fiber, they form the tract. Again, in your physiology, you would have learned about ascending tracts and descending tract. What do you mean by ascending tract? Ascending tract consists of nerve fibers that carry the sensory information from the receptor through the spinal cord, and finally they reach the sensory cortex of the cerebrum. The descending tract consists of motor fibers that descend down from the motor cortex of the cerebrum via the brainstem, the spinal cord, and finally innervate the effector organ, that is the skeletal muscles. What is nuclei? Collection of cell bodies of the neurons within the central nervous system is called nuclei. In peripheral nervous system, you would have learned a similar term. Collection of cell bodies within the peripheral nervous system is called ganglia. Now, the ascending tract, I told you, consists of sensory nerve fiber carrying sensory information, isn't it? In that, you'll come across three set of neurons. They are called the first order neuron, second order neuron, and the third order neuron. This is the spinal cord. In the center, you see the central canal that is surrounded by the gray matter. You know the gray matter is going to be divided into anterior gray horn and posterior gray horn. And this is surrounded by the white matter. Now, the anterior gray horn consists of motor neurons. The posterior gray horn consists of sensory neurons. The axons from the posterior horn, they'll be in connection with the dorsal root, whereas the anterior gray horn will give rise to the ventral root. Now, in the dorsal root, we'll have the dorsal root ganglion. This ganglia consists of pseudo-unipolar neurons. The peripheral process of the pseudo-unipolar neurons, they innervate the receptor. The central process of the pseudo-unipolar neuron, they enter the posterior gray horn. They synapse with the cell bodies that you see in the posterior gray horn. The axons of these sensory neurons in the posterior gray horn, they cross to the opposite side. They ascend up in the white matter of the spinal cord. They go up via the brainstem, and finally they reach the thalamus, where they synapse with the sensory neurons there. The thalamus is considered to be the final relay station for all your sensory tracts. Now, the axons from the sensory neurons in the thalamus, they project to the sensory cortex. So here, in the ascending tract, the first order neuron is by the pseudo-unipolar neurons. Okay, so the pseudo-unipolar neurons in the dorsal root ganglia are the first order neurons. The sensory neurons in the posterior gray horn, they are the second order neuron. The sensory neuron in the thalamus, they are the third order neuron. Any example for the ascending tracts that you know? The spinothalamic tract? Yeah. Coming to the motor neurons in the descending tract, you have two sets of neurons here. the upper motor neuron and the lower motor neuron. So this is the cerebrum. This is the frontal lobe, which has the motor cortex. The motor cortex has the motor neurons. From the cell body of these motor neurons, you can see the axons coming down via the brainstem, via the spinal cord, and they synapse with the motor neurons in the anterior gray horn. And the axons that begin here, they innervate the skeletal muscle. So the cell body of the neurons that you see in the motor cortex of the cerebrum, they are called the upper motor neurons. Whereas the motor neurons that you see in the anterior gray horn of the spinal cord, they are called the lower motor neurons. In school, you'd have learned the parts of the brain. Okay, we'll have a quick revision of that. So you know the brain is further divided into forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain. The forebrain is also called prosencephalon. Midbrain is also called mesencephalon. The hindbrain is also called rhombencephalon. The prosencephalon or the forebrain is further divided into telencephalon and diencephalon. Telencephalon is the cerebrum. The cerebrum consists of the right and left cerebral hemispheres. Within each cerebral hemisphere, you'll see a cavity filled with CSF. They are called the lateral ventricles. So there are two lateral ventricles, one in each cerebral hemisphere. The diencephalon includes the thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus, subthalamus, and metathalamus. The cavity of the diencephalon is the third ventricle. So the third ventricle is actually situated in the midline between the two thalami. The midbrain or the mesencephalon is the shortest segment of the brain. The cavity that is present within the midbrain is the cerebral aqueduct. The hindbrain or the rhombencephalon is further divided into metencephalon and myelencephalon. The metencephalon consists of pons and cerebellum. The myelencephalon consists of medulla oblongata. The cavity of the hindbrain is the fourth ventricle. The fourth ventricle is actually situated behind the pons and the medulla in front of the cerebellum. The cerebral aqueduct actually connects the third ventricle with the fourth ventricle. Now, all of you or most of you must be missing your dissection hall, isn't it? Dissection hall is a place where the interaction takes place between the teacher and the students, among the students, and of course with the cadaver. Also, it is the most memorable place in our college life. Even in movies, if they want to show a medical college, they'll be showing only the anatomy dissection hall. Now, imagine you're inside the dissection hall. You have the brain specimen in your hand. Won't you like to look at it from different directions? So in your dissection hall, you'll get to see full brain, half brain, and different sections of brain. When you get a full brain in your hand, you would like to see it from the anterior part of it, posterior part of it, from the lateral part of it, superior, inferior part of it. When you get a half brain, you would like to turn and see the lateral and medial aspect of it. Okay, that's what we are going to see in the next few slides. So this is the brain. You're seeing the lateral surface of the brain, mainly the telencephalon part, that is the cerebrum, the cerebral hemisphere. So the blue arrow is pointing at the cerebral hemisphere. Now, how will you identify the cerebrum? How will you differentiate it from the cerebellum? It's easy to identify. You can see that the surface of the cerebrum is thrown into sulci and gyrus. The gyrus is the elevated portion that you see here. The fissures that you see in between, these are the sulcus. Okay, so the surface of the cerebral cortex is thrown into sulcus and gyrus. The front part of the cerebral hemisphere, the anterior part of it, that is the frontal lobe. Exactly opposite posteriorly, that's the occipital lobe. In front of the occipital lobe is the parietal lobe. Below the frontal and the parietal, this one that you see here, that's the temporal lobe. So we know cerebrum is divided into right and left cerebral hemisphere. Each hemisphere is further divided into 4 lobes: the frontal lobe, occipital lobe, parietal lobe, and temporal lobe. This dotted line that you see here, it represents one of the named sulcus called the lateral sulcus. Now, imagine yourself putting your fingers in this area and you try to separate the lips of the lateral sulcus. You'll come across a cortex hidden behind. This hidden cortex beneath the lateral sulcus is called insular cortex. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain, and you identify it using the sulci and gyri. Now, the green arrows pointing at the cerebellum. The cerebellum is the second largest part of the brain. It is located in the posterior cranial fossa. The pink arrow is the pons. Above the pons will be midbrain. Below the pons is medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata is going to continue down as spinal cord. Okay. So in this picture, we have seen about telencephalon. What is the function of frontal lobe? In physiology, you would have learned that it has the motor cortex. Also, an individual's personality, thinking, that is also processed in the frontal lobe. Occipital lobe receives your visual pathway, concerned with vision. Parietal lobe is the sensory cortex. Temporal lobe related to the auditory pathway, concerned with hearing. Now, we have turned the lateral surface and we are viewing the medial surface of the brain. The blue arrows again pointing to a cerebrum, the cerebral hemisphere. You see the sulci and gyri of the cerebral cortex. The red arrow is pointing to an important structure, the corpus callosum. What is corpus callosum now? So the corpus callosum is actually bundle of nerve fibers, white matter, that's going to connect the right and the left cerebral hemispheres. So that is involved in transfer of information from one cerebral hemisphere to the other. It links both the cerebral hemispheres. So that is the corpus callosum. Beneath the corpus callosum, this area that you see here, that probe space, that's the lateral ventricle, the cavity of the lateral ventricle. So the lateral ventricle is actually C-shaped. What you see here, this part of the lateral ventricle within the parietal lobe is called the central part or the body of the lateral ventricle. But it's not confined to the parietal lobe alone. A part of it extends anteriorly into the frontal lobe, posteriorly into the occipital lobe, and also downwards into the temporal lobe, lateral ventricle. The green arrow, yeah, it's the cerebellum. You see the medial surface of the cerebellum here. So the cerebellum also has, the cerebellar cortex also has numerous fissures. The area between these fissures is called folia. The cerebellum is divided into right and left cerebellar hemispheres connected by vermis. What is the function of cerebellum? So it controls the posture, the muscle tone. It also coordinates motor activity. The right cerebellar hemisphere controls the right side of the body. The left cerebellar hemisphere controls the left side of the body. The dotted line that you see here in this region, this is the area of diencephalon. The upper part of is the thalamus. The posterior part of the thalamus will bear the medial and lateral geniculate body. That is the region of metathalamus. Here just this area will be the subthalamus. The area where you see the mammillary body, that's the hypothalamus. The cavity of the diencephalon is the third ventricle. I told you that's the midline structure between the two thalami. Can you see a projection here? Okay, that's called the interthalamic adhesion that connects the right and the left thalami. It passes through the cavity of the third ventricle. We'll be talking about it again, don't worry, okay? So the dotted line is the region of the diencephalon. You see the thalamus above, the hypothalamus below, the metathalamus behind, the subthalamus is this area, the epithalamus will be this. The pink star, that's the midbrain. The dotted line is the cavity of the midbrain, that's the cerebral aqueduct. The blue star is pons. This one that you see here, that's the cavity of fourth ventricle. Okay, the fourth ventricle is in the shape of rhomboid. It is also called the rhomboid fossa. Now, below the pons, you'll have the medulla. So the fourth ventricle is actually located behind the pons and medulla in front of the cerebellum. The third ventricle is connected to the fourth ventricle by means of cerebral aqueduct. The lateral ventricle is present within each cerebral hemisphere. Okay. Both the lateral ventricles are separated by septum pellucidum. What you see here, sort of torn, that's the septum pellucidum. Okay. It extends from the inferior surface of the corpus callosum to the upper surface of fornix. This is the fornix. So the septum pellucidum separates the lateral ventricle of the right side and the left side. There is no communication between the right and left lateral ventricle. But each lateral ventricle will communicate with the third ventricle through this opening here, exactly where my arrow is. That's the interventricular foramen of Monro. Okay. The lateral ventricle, each lateral ventricle communicates with the third ventricle through the interventricular foramen of Monro. The fornix that I told you here, it extends from the hippocampus. It's a bundle of nerve fibers, white matter, coming from the hippocampus to the mammillary body of hypothalamus. Now, telencephalon is over. We are moving on to diencephalon. This area between the two dotted lines that you see here, that is the region of diencephalon. As I told you earlier, the arrow is pointing at the thalamus. The cavity of the diencephalon is third ventricle. This projection that I told you, that is interthalamic adhesion. Okay. So it passes through the third ventricle, through the cavity of the third ventricle, connecting both the thalami. The red arrow is pointing in the region of hypothalamus, where you see these mammillary bodies. The thalamus is separated from the hypothalamus by a sulcus here. The posterior part of the thalamus, it bears the medial geniculate body, lateral geniculate body, which are part of metathalamus. So what is the function of thalamus? As we have seen, it is the final relay station for all the sensory impulses, for all your sensory tracts. Hypothalamus, it is considered to be the head ganglion for your autonomic nervous system. Metathalamus, the geniculate bodies, you know, they are related to the medial geniculate bodies related to the auditory pathway, lateral geniculate bodies related to the visual pathway. So they are concerned with hearing and vision. This is again another picture to show you the medial surface of the cerebrum, mainly the region of diencephalon. This arrow, what you see here, that is the region of pineal gland, the habenula nuclei, which belong to the epithalamus. So the epithalamus is involved in controlling sleep-wake cycle. This area just above the midbrain, that's the subthalamus. The subthalamus is a component of basal nuclei, which is involved in coordination of motor activity. So we have got to see the supralateral surface. We saw the medial surface. So now we are going to see the superior surface and inferior surface. So when you hold the brain in your hand and view it from above, you see the cerebral hemispheres, the right and the left cerebral hemispheres, and a gap separating with the two. This fissure that separates the right and the left cerebral hemispheres, that's called the median longitudinal fissure. Okay. The dural fold that occupies the median longitudinal fissure is falx cerebri. Now, if you put your fingers here and separate both the cerebral hemispheres, your fingers will come in contact with upper surface of corpus callosum. Can you see the corpus callosum there? Now, coming to the inferior surface. So, this is the orbital surface of the frontal lobe. This is the inferior surface of the temporal lobe. Okay. This blue arrow is pointing the olfactory bulb and the olfactory tract. That's your first cranial nerve. This one is pointing the optic nerve. That's the optic chiasma. These are the optic tract. This inferior surface is the best way to see your midbrain. The internal features of the midbrain. The purple arrow is pointing at the midbrain. The red arrow is pointing to a cavity that you see in the midbrain posteriorly. That is a cerebral aqueduct. Now, in the inferior surface, this area that you see here, anterolaterally by the optic tract, posterolaterally by the crus cerebri of the midbrain, this region is called interpeduncular fossa. Okay, this interpeduncular fossa is an important area in the base of the brain. It's an important 5 mark for you. Okay, anterolaterally by the optic tract, posterolaterally by the crus cerebri of the midbrain. The contents that you see here will be the stalk of the pituitary, the tuber cinereum, the mammillary body, the posterior perforated substance. Apart from that, the circle of Willis that provides the blood supply to the brain lodges in this area, the interpeduncular fossa. Now, coming to the sections of brain, coronal section. So the coronal section, you'll get to see the superior, inferior, anterior and posterior aspect. Okay. So here, in the superior aspect, separating the right and the left cerebral hemisphere where the purple arrow is pointing out, that's the median longitudinal fissure. This one beneath. So what did we feel when you put the tip of the fingers between the two cerebral hemispheres through the median longitudinal fissure? The red arrow is pointing at corpus callosum. The green arrow is pointing into the lateral ventricle. Can you see this area here? That's the septum pellucidum, which I told you, separating both the lateral ventricle. It lies in the midline. This is again a coronal section. The purple arrow is pointing at median longitudinal fissure. The red arrow is pointing at corpus callosum. The green arrow, the lateral ventricles. You can make out the septum pellucidum here. So the septum pellucidum actually connects the inferior surface of the corpus callosum to the fornix. In this coronal section, you can see the area here. What could this be? The midbrain. Can you see the cerebral aqueduct here? Below the midbrain is pons. Below the pons is medulla oblongata. Below the medulla oblongata, spinal cord. So what you see in the coronal section depends upon where the section is taken, whether anteriorly, posteriorly, or in the middle. This is horizontal section. So you should be able to orient to this section. This is the anterior part of it. You can make out the median longitudinal fissure here. So anteriorly, this will be the frontal lobe. Posteriorly, that will be the occipital lobe. This is the part of your temporal lobe. The green arrows pointing to something beneath the lateral sulcus. That's the insular cortex. Yeah, we saw the median longitudinal fissure. Now, beneath it, this white matter, that's the corpus callosum. Beneath the corpus callosum, the red arrow, that's a lateral ventricle. Okay. So remember the lateral ventricle, I told you it is C-shaped, extending anteriorly, posteriorly, as well as inferiorly. So this is also again lateral ventricle, where my arrow is. This is the choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle. This part of the lateral ventricle in the occipital lobe, that is called the posterior horn. This yellow dotted line that you see here in the midline, what could that be? That's the region of third ventricle between the two thalami. So on either side of the dotted line, that mass of gray matter that you see here, that is the thalamus. Apart from that, this is our insular cortex. Can you make out this gray matter here? That's the lentiform nucleus. It has an outer putamen, inner pale globus pallidus. This is our thalamus. This one forming the floor of the lateral ventricle, that's a caudate nucleus. Now, this white matter bundle that you see here, between the lentiform nucleus and caudate nucleus, between the lentiform nucleus and the thalami, that is the internal capsule. Now, this horizontal section is the best way to study the components of basal nuclei. So, in this section, you can see the outer gray matter of the cerebral cortex. You see the inner white matter. Now, within the white matter, you see gray matter. These are again collections of cell bodies, okay, within the central nervous system. That's why it is called basal nuclei, okay. So you see the lentiform nucleus, the caudate nucleus. What is the function of basal nuclei? To coordinate the movements. So far we have seen full brain from different views. We saw the half brain, then we saw coronal section, horizontal section. Now what is this? Whatever we saw in this horizontal section, now we are going to dissect it out and see it here. So there are different dissection methods to study different parts of the brain. Okay. So here you see the full brain there, the lateral sulcus. So the area, the cerebral cortex around the lateral sulcus has been removed. What you see here, I told you that's the hidden cortex or the insular cortex. Okay. Now in the horizontal section, what lies inner to the insular cortex? We saw the lentiform nucleus, remember? So once if you remove the insular cortex, you'll get to see the putamen globus pallidus. Okay, so that is the insular cortex. We remove the lateral sulcus and the area surrounding it to see the insular cortex. We remove the insular cortex, we'll get to see putamen globus pallidus. Once we remove the globus pallidus and putamen, we'll get to see the internal capsule. The fibers of the internal capsule are continuous above with corona radiata and below with crus cerebri of midbrain. Okay. So brain you'll be getting for soft part discussion in Viva. You should be able to hold it in anatomical position. You should be able to orient the superior, inferior, anterior, posterior, medial and lateral aspect of it. So now we are seeing the medial part, medial surface. So this is the anterior part, the medial surface of the frontal lobe, medial surface of the parietal lobe, medial surface of the occipital lobe, that will be the temporal lobe. Okay, so this is the occipital pole, this is temporal pole, this will be the frontal pole. So that is the corpus callosum. It's seen on the medial surface of the cerebral hemisphere. This corpus callosum can also be used to identify anterior posterior end. Corpus callosum is a frequently asked Potter question for you. Identify, give its parts. That's what they ask. So the corpus callosum, it begins here. This part is called the rostrum. It takes a bend here. That's called the genu. This part in relation to the parietal lobe, that is called the body. The posterior end is broad. It's called splenium. Okay. These are the four parts of corpus callosum: rostrum, genu, body, and splenium. The probe space of this red arrow, that's the lateral ventricle. In the floor of the lateral ventricle, you see a structure bulged out. That's the caudate nucleus. This green arrow is pointing towards the fornix. Fornix, I told you, it is a bundle of nerve fiber, white matter. It begins in this area, the hippocampus. It goes and ends in the mammillary body of hypothalamus. The septum pellucidum extends from inferior surface of the corpus callosum to the upper surface of the fornix, separating the lateral ventricle of both the sides. Yeah. Now, this is again inferior surface of the brain, the base of the brain. The green arrow is pointing towards the crus cerebri of the midbrain. Below that, what you're looking into, that's the pons. Below the pons is medulla oblongata. Below the medulla oblongata, we have the spinal cord. Now, these three structures, which are situated one below the other, the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata, are together called brainstem. The brainstem consists of the fibers of ascending tract and descending tract. More importantly, it lodges the nuclei for most of your cranial nerves. The area enclosed between the dotted lines, what is that? The interpeduncular fossa. Okay. So anterolaterally by the optic tract, posterolaterally by the crus cerebri of the midbrain. That's the stalk of the pituitary, the tuber cinereum, the mammillary body, the posterior perforated substance. Apart from that, the most important content I told you is the arterial anastomosis that you see here. It is called arterial circle of Willis. It is formed by branches of internal carotid artery and vertebral artery. The branches of circle of Willis, they are the main source of blood supply to the brain. Yeah. So this is a small revision. You know the cavity of the forebrain is lateral ventricle, that of the telencephalon. The cavity of the diencephalon is third ventricle. Cavity of hindbrain is fourth ventricle. The third ventricle is connected to the fourth ventricle by means of cerebral aqueduct. The lateral ventricle is connected to the third ventricle by means of foramen of Monro. That's what we are going to see now. So, what do you mean by cavity? So, the cavity inside the brain is nothing but the ventricles which are going to secrete cerebrospinal fluid. So, the cerebrospinal fluid that circulates in these ventricles then communicates with the subarachnoid space through the openings in the fourth ventricle. Okay. So the lateral ventricle situated within each cerebral hemisphere, as I told you, it is C-shaped. The main part, the body of the lateral ventricle, lies within the parietal lobe. But it is not confined to the parietal lobe. It extends forward into the frontal lobe, where it is called anterior horn. It extends backwards into the occipital lobe, where it is called posterior horn. Then it extends downwards into the temporal lobe, where it is called inferior horn. And I've told you, both the lateral ventricles do not communicate with each other. They are separated by septum pellucidum. The cavity of the diencephalon is the third ventricle. It's a midline structure. Can you identify what is pointed out here? That's the interthalamic adhesion. Remember, I told you, passes through the third ventricle, connecting the thalami of both the sides. That's what you see here. Now, the lateral ventricle is connected to the third ventricle by interventricular foramen of Monro. So the blue arrow here is pointing towards the fourth ventricle. I told you the shape of it is rhomboid. It's called rhomboid fossa. The fourth ventricle, as you see here, is situated behind the pons, behind the medulla, in front of the cerebellum. Now, the CSF from the third ventricle communicates with the fourth ventricle through the cerebral aqueduct that passes through the midbrain. Any obstruction in the outflow of CSF can lead to a condition called hydrocephalus. This is another picture to show you the ventricles of the brain. So the corpus callosum, beneath the corpus callosum, that's the lateral ventricle. The cavity of the diencephalon, that's the third ventricle. This yellow color that you see in the third ventricle is nothing but interthalamic adhesion that passes through the third ventricle, connecting the thalami of both the sides. This is the region of communication between the lateral ventricle and the third ventricle. That is called interventricular foramen of Monro. This is the fourth ventricle behind the pons and medulla in front of the cerebellum. Now the third ventricle communicates with the fourth ventricle through cerebral aqueduct or aqueduct of Sylvius. So in head and neck, you would have learned that there are 12 cranial nerves. And these cranial nerves are going to emerge from the brain. That is the olfactory bulb and the olfactory tract, which is going to receive the olfactory nerves. The first cranial nerve that is concerned with the sense of smell. The olfactory nerve is mainly related to the telencephalon. That's the optic nerve you see here. The optic nerve is concerned with sense of vision. And it's related to the lateral geniculate body that you saw in the diencephalon, the metathalamus. From there, it will be projected to the visual cortex of your cerebrum in the occipital lobe. So this is the crus cerebri of the midbrain. Emerging medial to it, that's our third cranial nerve, the oculomotor nerve, which is going to supply the extraocular muscles of the eyeball. This one, this slender cranial nerve that you see here, coming from the dorsal aspect to the ventral aspect, that's the fourth cranial nerve, the trochlear nerve, that's going to supply the superior oblique muscle of the eyeball. The red arrow is pointing at the largest cranial nerve, the fifth cranial nerve, trigeminal nerve, that's going to divide into ophthalmic, maxillary, and mandibular. The fifth cranial nerve, you can see it emerging from the ventral surface of pons. The pink arrow is actually pointing at the pontomedullary junction, which is situated at the lower border of pons and upper border of medulla. There are three cranial nerves which emerge in the pontomedullary junction. From medial to lateral, they are the sixth cranial nerve, the seventh cranial nerve, and the eighth cranial nerve. Sixth cranial nerve is a abducent nerve that's going to supply lateral rectus muscle. The seventh cranial nerve has a large motor root and a small sensory root called the nervus intermedius. The motor root lies medial to the sensory root. It's going to supply your muscles of facial expression. The most lateral one, that's our eighth cranial nerve, the vestibulocochlear nerve, which is concerned with hearing and equilibrium. The blue arrow is pointing in the region of medulla. So the last four cranial nerves are going to emerge from the medulla. The 9th, 10th, 11th, and the 12th cranial nerve. So we know the brainstem consists of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. And I told you the brainstem lodges the nuclei for these cranial nerves. The cranial nerves that are emerging from the midbrain are the third and the fourth. From the pons, ventral surface of the pons, the trigeminal nerve, pontomedullary junction, from medial to lateral, 6th, 7th, and 8th. The last four cranial nerves come from the medulla, exit from the medulla, the glossopharyngeal nerve, the vagus nerve, the accessory nerve, and the hypoglossal nerve. So, now we have come to the end of this presentation. So, how we are going to differentiate a CT from an MRI? Okay, we'll learn. So, this first picture is the CT brain, horizontal section. So, in CT brain, this dense white structure that you see here is actually the skull bone. This one, now you can identify that's the lateral ventricle, which is filled with CSF. So the CSF or the fluid, it appears sort of more black, dark color. Now, between the bone and the ventricle, the brain tissue that you see here, it appears in different shades. So this is CT brain. CT brain, the procedure can be done fast. You get the results very quickly. But as you see here, the fine details of the brain is not that very easy to make out. CT brain is helpful to diagnose any fracture of skull and intracranial hemorrhage. Coming to the second picture, what you see here, that's the MRI brain. So here, you can make out the median longitudinal fissure. Come down straight. This dark black color that you see here, that will be a corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is, I told you, bundle of nerve fibers. So it's white matter. Okay. So here, MRI T2 brain, you can see that the corpus callosum appears more darker. This white color that you see here, that is the CSF within the lateral ventricle, and it appears more white, dense white. Okay. So the CSF or the fluid appears sort of white. So this thin rim of white you see here surrounding the brain tissue, that is the CSF in the subarachnoid space. Okay. Now, so this will be the frontal lobe. Behind that will be the occipital lobe. You can make out the insular cortex. You can make out the lentiform nucleus. This is a third ventricle in the midline. On either side of the third ventricle, that's the thalamus. In the floor of the lateral ventricle, that's the caudate nucleus. Okay, so caudate nucleus, thalamus, lentiform nucleus, all you know it's made up of cell bodies, gray matter. Okay, they are the components of basal nuclei. All those appear much lighter shade of black. Whereas the white matter, the internal capsule, can you make it out here? That appears as dark black. Okay, so I'll repeat it again. MRI brain, you can see the corpus callosum as dark black. You can see the fluid within the ventricle, the CSF as dark white. Okay. Whereas the gray matter, it appears little paler. Okay. So this is the corpus callosum, the CSF within the lateral ventricle, the caudate nucleus, the lentiform nucleus, the thalami, the third ventricle, the median longitudinal fissure, the frontal lobe, the insular cortex, the occipital lobe. So in MRI brain, you can make out the finer details of the brain tissue. Okay. MRI brain is comparatively costlier, but when you can take it is like when you suspect stroke, ischemia, the infarct areas are very easily seen. Yeah. So the previous one was normal images. This one that you see here is abnormal ones. So this is a CT. You can see the dense white bone. This one is intracranial hemorrhage. Okay. You know, fluid appears dark black in CT. So this is collection of fluid of blood in your subarachnoid space, probably. This is MRI. This area you can make out some abnormality. So an infarct or ischemic area, it appears sort of hyper intense. This hyper intense area actually indicates irreversible brain damage. Okay. So if you have paid attention to this lecture, you would have realized that you can very well read a CT and MRI at the same time. You can also be able to differentiate the normal from the abnormal. Okay. Now at the beginning of this presentation, I told you, I'm going to give you two important tips to mask your anatomy. Can we see that quickly? Okay. So over the 12 years of teaching experience in anatomy I have had, the two important things that I stress to my students are, the first one, so most of us, most of you will be learning everything exam oriented for exam purpose, just to pass through. Of course, to get a distinction, to get a honors and medal, it counts a lot. But in our profession, apart from the marks, the clinical knowledge we acquire is much more important. Don't you think so? When you sit in your OP and a patient comes to you with complaints of headache, what are the things that should pop up in your mind? So the cause for headache could be a most common cause, such as dehydration, or it can be due to a most uncommon cause such as brain tumor. Okay, so even a simple headache, there are a lot of things that should pop up in your mind. Whenever, whatever you study, try to correlate it with some clinical anatomy. Okay, that is the best way to learn anatomy. Everything that you learn in anatomy, the structure, the relations, everything will have some clinical importance. If you could relate it to some clinical importance, that's the best way to remember, the best way to learn anatomy. It will be very helpful for you later on. The second point that I want to tell you is anatomy. Take my words, anatomy is a very, very, very volatile subject. For example, one topic, you sit and read for hours and hours. The very next day, you try to recollect it, only about 50 to 70% you'll be able to remember. You read, you revise, you recollect, you memorize using mnemonic. Sometimes you remember the mnemonic, but you don't remember the expansion for that. In spite of all this, you tend to forget. Don't panic. It's very normal for you and for me. The best way to remember anatomy, as I tell my students, by teaching to others. Yes, you remember anatomy when you teach it to others. In your home, You'll have your sibling, elder or young, your parents, your grandparents. You can get hold of them and teach them anatomy. Yes, try it. And when you come back to college, your hostel mates, your batchmates, anyone you want, you can get hold of them and teach them anatomy. Teaching is the best way to remember anatomy. Okay, try it.